Bună seara, dragilor! Al patrulea interviu după Robert Malone, după Alejandro Diaz și după Denis Rancourt este cu Mattias Desmet. So now I will switch in English. Welcome, Mattias.
Thank you, Aurelian. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm very happy to have you here. I've read your book. All of my audience all over the social media, I made sure they know about your book. We are a country that had a totalitarian regime until 89. As you know, Ceausescu was overthrown in 1989. And I think your book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, described very well what happened in our country before 89 and all over the world between 2020 2022. Again, thank you very much for being here, and I have great respect for the work you've done with the critical mass formation, the whole process explained, and so on. So again, thank you for being here. Now, because I don't have a short bio of yours, I think it would be nice if you can tell us a little bit about your, titles, scientific work, and so on. So, kind of, maybe you can present yourself in a minute or two.
Yes. Well, I'm a professor in clinical psychology.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote my PhD about problems in academic research, which is very relevant, I think, in the context of the COVID crisis, because what we've seen is that time and time again, the claims made in academic papers prove to be false later on, or many claims prove to be false. For instance, the claims about the mortality of the virus made in the beginning of the crisis, the claims about the efficacy of the jabs, of the vaccines, proved wrong, and so on. So I made my PhD about that, about the problems with academic research, in particular in the field of psychology. And so I'm a professor in clinical psychology. I have a master degree in statistics as well. I'm a psychotherapist with a clinical practice also, besides my work as a professor. And yes, I wrote this book, of course. My book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism. It was not my first book; it was my third one. It was my first book for general public, and which is now, after about 1.5 years, it's being translated in about 20 languages, I think. So I think I can say that it is an international bestseller. The book has been, thank you. The book has been banned at the Ghent University in my classes on culture and society critics. I cannot use it.
Of course, it was banned. That's a badge of honor.
Yeah, that's well. What happened to the book was a little bit predicted by the book, I think.
Right. Correct.
Yes. So, and many people think I mean, the university claims that the book is full of errors and sloppiness, but they refuse to provide a list with the errors. So it seems they have a hard time providing evidence for what they claim. Well, that's in a nutshell who I am, Aurelian. And the rest you will learn to know me during the interview, I think.
Okay. So now I would like to go right into the middle essence of your book, which is the critical mass formation. You describe in your book this process, and you divide it in like 5, let's say, steps. 5 phases, I would say. If you can explain in a nutshell, of course, you cannot say everything you said in the book, but in a nutshell, how critical mass is formed inside of a society, of a group, of a community.
Yes. You know, I will just give it a short introduction. When the Corona crisis started, I studied the statistics a little bit, and I noticed immediately that, in my opinion, most of the statistics that were used in the mainstream narrative were wrong. Like that the mortality rates were much lower than the statistics claimed them to be. And then, like after a few months, um, that was actually proven beyond doubt, because the initial statistical models predicted that in a small country such as Sweden, about 60 to 80,000 people would die if the country didn't go into lockdown. And Sweden, by the end of May 2020,
Yes.
over 60,000 people would die according to the models. And then by the end of 2020, Sweden hadn't gone into lockdown, and only 6,000 people died. And even to arrive at that figure of 6,000, they had to count the number of victims of the virus in a very enthusiastic way. If they would have counted them in a more usual way, it would have been even much less than 6,000 people. So,
Correct.
and that at
Correct.
that moment, I noticed that while everyone who wanted to see it could see that the COVID narrative was based on statistics that had been utterly absurd in many respects, people continue to follow the narrative. They continue to buy into the narrative, and that was the moment when I started to think about the psychological processes that could make that the population continue to buy into a narrative that is completely wrong, and in many respects. And I became aware of the fact that what was going on was a psychological process called mass formation, which is fundamental in the emergence of totalitarian regimes. And that's what the book is all about. The book is all about how a totalitarian state emerges, develops in a society, and more in particular, how this process of mass formation works, because that's something extremely important. The title of my book is The Psychology of Totalitarianism, and it's extremely important to understand what totalitarianism is. And you have lived in a totalitarian state,
Of
so
course.
you
Yeah.
know by experience what it is. But at the psychological level, people often confuse it with a classical dictatorship, and that's not the same at all. In a classical
Okay.
dictatorship, people are just scared of a small group of people whom they experience as very powerful, very aggressive, and they just accept that the small group of people unilaterally imposes its social contract to the population. But a totalitarian regime is based on something completely different. In a totalitarian state, there first is this process of mass formation, and which is a typical kind of group formation with very specific effects at the level of individual mental functioning. And for instance, when people are in the grip of a mass formation, they become radically incapable of taking a critical distance of what the group believes in. That's one. They can believe in the most absurd things if the group believes in them. And secondly, people in the grip of a mass formation typically become willing to radically self-sacrifice, to sacrifice everything when the group asks such. That used to be important to them, their health, their wealth, the future of their children, their safety, doesn't matter what, they want to sacrifice everything when the group demands so. And thirdly, extremely important, is that people in the grip of a mass formation typically become radically intolerant for dissonant voices. So they become, in the end, believe it is their holy duty to eliminate everyone who doesn't go along with the masses, or with the mainstream narrative, or with the narrative that led to the mass formation. And so that's what happens in a mass formation, and it happens indeed. Mass formations have always existed. They existed as mankind exists, but they emerge under very specific conditions that were more and more met throughout the last few centuries. And these conditions are the following. First and for all, a large part of the population has to feel lonely. And just before the corona crisis, that definitely was the case. Like over 40% of the population worldwide reported to be have no meaningful relationships at all, and to connect only to other people through the internet. And so that this lonely state is the most fundamental psychological precondition for a mass formation to emerge. And once people feel lonely, they will typically start to be confronted with a lack of meaning making. They will feel as if their lives are meaningless. And then thirdly, they will be confronted with so-called free-floating anxiety, frustration, and aggression. That means a kind of anxiety, frustration, and aggression in which people don't know what they feel anxious, frustrated, and aggressive for, which is an extremely aversive mental state. If people feel anxious and they don't know what they feel anxious for, they feel they cannot control their anxiety. And if people are in this state, something very specific can happen. If in this state, a narrative is distributed through the mainstream media, through the media, through the mass media, providing an object of anxiety, indicating an object of anxiety, and at the same time providing a strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, then something very specific can happen. All this freely floating anxiety can connect to this object of anxiety, and there might be a huge willingness to participate in the strategy to deal with the object of anxiety. For instance, the lockdowns to deal with the virus, or concentration camps to deal with the Jews, or gulags to deal with the aristocracy, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There might be a huge willingness to deal, to participate in a strategy to deal with the object of anxiety, even if the strategy is utterly absurd. Just because in this way, people feel they can control their anxiety again, and they have a way to take out their frustration and aggression on something, on an object. And even more important is what happens in the next step. Because so many people at the same time participate in a strategy to deal with the object of anxiety, people feel connected again. They feel not lonely anymore. They feel connected again because they fight the same heroic collective battle with the object of anxiety. And that's what makes mass formation so attractive to many people. It saves them from loneliness, which is a hell for a human being. Being fundamentally lonely and disconnected is extremely aversive, and mass formation seems to liberate them from the loneliness. I say seems because indeed it doesn't really take away the loneliness, because a mass is a group that is formed not because people connect to each other, to other people, not because individuals connect to other individuals. A mass is a group that is formed because each individual separately connects to the collective ideal, to the collective. And the famous solidarity of the masses is never a solidarity of one individual for another individual, of one human being for another human being. It's a solidarity of individuals, of each individual separately, with the collective. And in the end, people feel much more solidarity with the collective than with other individuals, meaning that they start to report each other to the state or to the collective every time they think that someone doesn't show enough solidarity with the collective. And that explains why in the corona crisis, everyone was talking about solidarity and citizenship, but at the same time, they all accepted that if someone got an accident on the street, they were no longer allowed to help that person unless by accident they had their surgical gloves and a surgical mask at their disposal, which means never. So that's the difference between the totalitarian solidarity and real, humane, loving solidarity between individuals. So that's in a nutshell. This process of mass formation, which actually is a kind of mass hypnosis. It's technically speaking, psychologically speaking, mass formation is identical to hypnosis. It's identical. It's the same. It's a focusing of attention on one small aspect of reality, the object of anxiety. And through this focus on one small aspect of reality, the rest of reality disappears. People only see the victims claimed by the virus, and they don't see the victims anymore claimed by the measures. That's so typical. And then that's exactly what happens in hypnosis. A hypnotist focuses someone's attention on a very small aspect of reality, and the rest of reality disappears. It is as if it no longer exists. And this is so strong, this mechanism, that you can perform extremely operations, surgical operations under hypnosis. I wrote a long essay about that on my Substack page. People can read it there. I'm on Substack. I don't know if you're familiar with Substack.
Yes.
Yes. I wrote a long essay specifically on this topic of surgical operations under hypnosis just because I got a lot of trouble with that. I once claimed in a show that it's possible, and I had seen an open heart operation under hypnosis, and I meant, of course, that I had seen it on a video.
Okay.
But people used it here in Belgium to smear my reputation.
Okay.
And I wrote a long essay about that together with my colleague Tineke de Kok, in which we described this a little bit lower, I think, in which we described all the scientific literature about that's what it is: hypnosedation, mind over matter in the operating room. That's the article. It's a long article in which we review all the scientific evidence for surgical operations under hypnosis. So it's important because it's so similar to mass formation, and that's what people in the end up in a kind of hypnotic state actually in a mass formation, which makes them willing to follow the narrative, even if it is completely absurd and also dangerous to follow it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so basically, you say that this is the article. I want to show it again. Okay, you say that this object of anxiety, once that is imposed by the propaganda, by mass media, by the state, and accepted on the collective mind of the community, then this mass formation start to develop, and in the end, what we have is a bunch of people that think their problem is that object indicated by the authorities. Correct?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Now, I want you to explain to us why, in the people's mind, the real problem is replaced by the problem the authorities points our attention to.
Good. Do I have to explain that?
Yes, if you can, please do so.
How much time do we have?
We have no time limit. We are not on classical TV. It's your time limit is the limit, not my time limit.
Yes, indeed, that it's exactly what you. Yes, that's exactly what happens. For one reason or another, people don't see the real problem, and they replace it by a fake by a problem.
By a fake problem.
By a problem that in many respects is not the real problem, and that's what happens, I think, throughout the last 2 or 3 decades. We've went from crisis to crisis: the terrorism crisis, the climate crisis, the banking crisis, the credit crisis, the Me Too crisis, the climate crisis, the Corona crisis, the Ukraine crisis, and so on and so on and so on. And all these crises sometimes are based on a real problem. Sometimes the problem is only to a very limited extent real. But in all these occasions, the narratives about the crisis, in particular in Western Europe and America, I think, are used to convince people to accept a certain switch from a democratic state system to a technocratic state system, which is a kind of a totalitarian state system. So, but how did that happen? I think in my book I try to analyze, to present a very fundamental analysis of this process. Some people, for instance, say that the real problem is a certain evil elite that manipulates them, and so on and so on. Okay. That's a little part of the problem, I think. I mean, there is certain leaders and certain powerful people who try to manipulate the population. That's true. But I think that in the end, there is a more fundamental problem. And the more fundamental problem, I think, is our view on man and the world. The way in which we started to think about life somewhere in the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th century. When the religious view on man and the world disappeared, it was replaced by the so-called mechanist, rationalist view on man and the world. A view on man and the world which believed that the entire universe is like a dead machine. It's a set of it's like a set of elementary particles, and that this entire universal machine, of which the human being is a small aspect, the human being is considered a small machine and a big machine, this entire machine can be understood, controlled, and manipulated in a rational way. That's the fundamental belief of our modern view on man in the world. And this view on man in the world created a new elite because the religious view on man in the world disappeared. The old elite also disappeared and was replaced by a new elite. And this new elite had only one way, or was under the illusion that they had only one way to control the population, and that was through indoctrination and propaganda. Mm-hmm. And as soon as this mechanist, rationalist view on man in the world became dominant, that means shortly after the French Revolution, we've seen the emergence of the first institutes of propaganda in the Western world. The first institute was Le Bureau d'Opinion Publique, the Office for Public Opinion, established under the Napoleonic regime. And then propaganda became more and more and more important. And like people such as Trotter, Lippmann, Bernays, Edward Bernays, who are considered the founding fathers of propaganda, if you read their books, you will see on what basis they developed these propaganda machinery. They just believed that the leaders could never control the masses and the crowds anymore, because they could not impose their will anymore to the population. Like the old leaders, the noblemen and the clergy, just told the population what they wanted them to do, and the population did what they wanted them to do. Just because this old view on man in the world, this religious view on man in the world, well, it just said that certain people were created by God to rule and others to follow. And everyone...
the emperor was the God representative on earth, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And well, most people didn't really believe that, but everyone behaved as if it was true.
Nevertheless, they conformed. Yeah,
of course, that's what always happens with dominant narratives in a society. People don't believe it, but they do as if it is true. Or many people don't believe it, but they do as if it is true. And then when
this thing switched to the materialistical approach,
exactly,
let's say,
yeah,
philosophy.
Exactly. And this materialist approach, the leaders had a problem, because in this materialist view of man in the world, there was no God who created the world and who created certain people to rule. So they had no justification to just tell the population what to do, and they found a solution. And initially, they just used the democratic model. They said, okay, from now on, the leaders have to be elected by the population. But when they did so, they immediately realized that they had a problem, because if a leader has to be elected by the population, he is not really a leader. He has to try to find out what the population wants and then give the population what it wants, or otherwise he won't be re-elected. So that is the problem described by Edward Bernays, Trotman, Lipper. The leaders had become followers. And they found a solution to that, which was the following. If we cannot make the population do what we want anymore, just like that, we can try to make the population do what we want without the population knowing that they do what we want, meaning that we can try to manipulate them. Constantly in such a way that they do what we want without them knowing that they do what we want. So that was the solution they found, and that's why they developed all these propaganda techniques based on mass psychology. And this propaganda was like a new kind of lie. People have lied always, as long as mankind exists. But this propaganda was a new kind of lie. I mean, it was theoretically it was based on scientific theories, on mass psychology. And there was like a complete industry that was established to manipulate the population. So it was a theoretically founded, ideologically justified, and industrialized new kind of lie. The new elite tried to be in charge of society through propaganda and indoctrination, and that became worse and worse and worse and worse throughout the last few centuries. Propaganda became more and more crucial to the elite to keep control of society. Until now, we live in a public space which is constantly saturated by indoctrination and propaganda. So that was the one thing. The one important evolution since the French Revolution onwards, since the materialist view on men in the world became dominant, is that this new elite developed itself, and this new elite which used excessively indoctrination and propaganda. And then the second extremely important thing that happened was that the population got in a new mental state. This materialist view on men in the world actually created loneliness. It led to the industrialization of the world. It led to the mechanization of the world. It made people think in such a way, in an extremely rationalist way, not rational, rationalist way, pseudo-rational way, made people think in a rational way. And if you try to grasp the essence of life in a rational way, you always isolate yourself from the essence of life, because the essence of life is always irrational. It can never be understood completely in a rational way. That's what the sciences showed us so well. So this new view on man in the world, on the one hand, created a new elite which used propaganda and indoctrination and put the population in an isolated, lonely state. And that's exactly what led to the mass formations. This propaganda of the elite and the fact that the population felt lonely, which made them extremely vulnerable to propaganda. So if you follow this analysis, you see that the root cause of the problems we find ourselves in is this view on man in the world. It's our way of thinking. It's our way of looking at life. It's our way of relating to other people. So we have a real solution to the problem will only be found if we can switch to a different view on man in the world. That's what we in the end have to do. And that's the basic challenge we are facing now. We have to find a new view on man in the world which transcends this rationalist view on man in the world. If we can look in a new way at man in the world, we will select a new elite spontaneously. The current elite will disappear and it will be replaced by a new elite. And the population won't feel lonely anymore, and it won't be so sensitive and vulnerable for propaganda anymore. So that's what we have to try to find out. And as I said, something extremely crucial in this process is that we have to start to realize that life, the basis of our individual existence and the cornerstone of human living together is not rational knowledge. No, it's something that transcends rational knowledge and which is often called resonating knowledge, empathic knowledge, or truth-telling, truth speech. The strange thing is that while we were fanatically obsessed with rational knowledge throughout the last few centuries, we lost touch with truth.
With truth, yeah.
Of course, truth is something much more than rational knowledge. And
once his logic doesn't matter if it's true or not.
Yes, it's strange because if you follow the rationalist and the materialist view on man in the world, it's stupid to tell the truth, because telling the truth is dangerous. If you are smart, if you're thinking really rational, you don't tell the truth. You try to manipulate the other people in such a way that they do what you want them to do. That's rational thinking. Speaking the truth, telling the truth is something completely different. It's from a purely materialist view on man in the world, it's stupid to tell the truth. Extremely stupid. And that's what we have to rediscover now, that telling the truth is the cornerstone of our human existence and the cornerstone of every really humane human living together. That's the revolution that has to happen. That's what the challenge we have to accept is that, and we will see that every time one of us speaks in a sincere, honest, truthful way, we will see that he slows down the mass formation, because if people speak in a sincere way, without trying to convince the other, just speaking in a sincere way, they disrupt the hypnosis a little bit. And they prevent that the mass formation goes to the last stage, where it starts to destroy each and everyone who doesn't go along with it. And at the same time, if you speak sincerely, honestly, your speech resonates. Truth speech is resonating speech, which means speech that really connects one human being with another human being, the soul of one being with the soul of another human being, which means that truth speech does not only is a solution for the symptom of our society, mass formation and totalitarianism, but it also is the remedy for the root cause of the problem, namely this loneliness and disconnectedness of our society. So that's why we have to realize that the real solution for the problems we find ourselves in is a set of people, a group of people who practice the art of truth speech. We all have to start to think about how we can speak in an as sincere and honest way as possible. And it's not easy to do so. But that's the solution for the problems we find ourselves in.
So I have here I displayed on the screen some documentary, The Psychology of Totalitarism,
Yes.
Headwind.tv, and those who want to watch it, they can watch it. I just give them a heads up about this. I'm browsing your Substack and I found it.
Yes.
It's 1 hour and 19 minutes. It's an episode about your book. So those who prefer to consume your book via video format, I think that's a good option. Nevertheless, I recommend reading the book. So buying and reading the book.
You could also watch my interview with Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
I was on Tucker Carlson's show when he was still on Fox News last year, and I had a long interview with him, which is often removed from the internet, so it's maybe a good reason to watch it. Yes, yes, but that's also, this documentary is also a good documentary. Yes.
I just wanted to ask you because I saw you on. I think I saw your interview on Epoch Times, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
You've been talking about. You've been describing the excess mortality, the truth about excess mortality. It wasn't about so much about the mass formation. It was about statistics, more about statistics.
Yes, it's possible. Yes.
And then you have this interview here, and then the book. But to me, it's still so unbelievable that in 3 years, all the individual rights and liberties were almost nullified. And the majority of people accepted that without any problem, without any opposing notable or let's say significant opposing movement or action. They were afraid of death. Okay, fear of death, it's something I can understand. What I cannot understand, though, is that some people now, if we were to be imposed another set of restrictions, will conform again.
They will.
Some of them, not all of them, but some
Not
of them.
all of them, no.
So that means the hypnosis is still there for them.
Yes, yes, exactly. And it.
So how can we, the one that are not under this hypnosis, what can we do to dissolve this hypnosis for the others, aside from speaking the truth and being sincere?
Oh, well, as long as people feel lonely, as long as people feel that their life doesn't make sense, as long as people are confronted with a lot of free-floating anxiety, frustration, and aggression, as long as they are in this terrible state, they will be sensitive for mass formation. Of course, that's the big point. The better you understand the process, because just like you, me too was surprised to see how blindly people conformed. Even people who understand the theory are still baffled when they see how conformist people are, even if what happens means that they will lose everything or a lot of things that are important to them. So that's exactly, it's a very strange situation. But the better you understand the mechanism, the more you see that it is extremely logical. People follow the narrative not because the narrative is true. They don't care in the end whether it is true or not. At least 20 to 30% of the population doesn't care. So it's only about 20 to 30% of the population which is really in the mass formation. But those people don't care whether the narrative is true or not. They follow the narrative because it allows them to control their anxiety, to take out their aggression and frustration to someone, and because it leads to this new social bond. When football hooligans in a stadium all sing the same song together, they don't sing it because it is the most beautiful song in the world or because the song is true or something. No, they sing it because they feel connected when they sing it. And in a football stadium, it's a nice thing. It's nice to be connected through singing a song. But in real life, people all sing the COVID song together, and this COVID song functions as a ritual. And all the corona measures and all the restrictions have the function of a ritual. And ritualistic behavior is a kind of behavior which has no practical meaning, and through which an individual shows that belonging to the collective is more important than its individual interests. So the more devoid of practical meaning a behavior is, and the more an individual has to sacrifice individually for it, the better a behavior functions as a ritual. And that's exactly why the corona restrictions for most people are the perfect rituals to give them a new sense of belonging to a community, to give them a new sense of being connected. But the disaster, of course, is, as I just explained, that they are not really connected. It's not a fruitful group that is formed. It's a mass that is formed, a mass which is in the end always extremely destructive and self-destructive. But that is the reason why people might buy into the narrative again next time. It's just because they don't care whether it is true or not. It's because they want to re-experience this connectedness. And that's it's like a public secret that many people were happy with the lockdowns. Many people felt that their lives, which felt like a meaningless rat race, became, in one way or another, they felt liberated from a certain burden by these corona restrictions and the corona measures. While for other people who didn't buy into the narrative, it was a hell on earth, let's say.
You say that the sense of belonging becomes more important than the truthfulness, of the manifestation, because they feel pseudo connected. And you made the distinction between the group and the mass.
Yeah.
The group, I think, contains the points on the graph and the relationships between the points, right? The mass is just points.
Mm-hmm.
No links between them, right?
Absolutely. Well, there are links, but yes, you use a very nice
hierarchy.
Only like that, all with the top.
Yeah, up, down, not between them.
And not among them. Yes, that's a strange thing. And the longer the mass formation exists, the more all the love and solidarity and energy is sucked away from the connections between the individuals, and is all invested in the connections between the individuals and the collective. So very literally, everyone wants from everyone else that they all sacrifice everything for the collective good, for the collective ideal. That's exactly what happened in the corona crisis. Everybody had to stay at home. Everybody had to stop going to work, and so on and so on, all because of the collective well-being. So that's what happens in a mass. That's what's happened in all the totalitarian states.
Now, if this collective, it's somewhere, it has a center of command, it has a unique, like a military style, let's say, dissemination of information, orders, commands, and so on, instructions, restrictions, whatever. My understanding is that the most effective antidote is to just start relate to each other
Yeah.
and exchange information and exchange emotions.
Yeah, strengthen local connections. Absolutely, strengthen human connections, and uh, absolutely, that's spot on. It's spot on. Really, that's what we all can do. We all can try to establish a really humane bond as a human being with another human being, and that's for me again where truth speech is so crucial because my next book is all about that. It's about what truth is and what truth speech is. And truth speech always is resonating speech. It's speech through which someone opens up, shows something of what he usually hides behind an outer ideal image, behind an outer appearance, and speaks directly from what you feel inside of you. And in this way, gives something through his speech to another human being. And if this other human being is willing to open up in a non-judgmental way and allows the words of the one who speaks to enter his uh, his his body and soul, then you have resonance. I will explain that in great detail in my next book. And that's the basic, elementary, fundamental act that is the cure for the problems we are in. And really, you can think, well, how long will we have to speak until we have the solution? You don't know. It can happen in a very short amount of time. It's just a small group of people that is really connected, a real group, which is really connected through truth speech with each other, very soon can become psychologically more powerful than the masses, no matter how impressive the propaganda machinery is. History has shown this time and time again. A small people that talks in a really truthful and sincere way is more powerful than the masses. So the only challenge we have to really keep in mind is that we have to try to establish such a group and we have to try to continue to speak in a sincere way to everyone who wants to hear it and that means we shouldn't try to convince the other people. Rational arguments have no big impact usually, or at least they are less important than the sincerity of our speech, than the courage we should find to open up and to just tell people how we feel in this situation, what our experience is in this situation, without trying to convince anyone. It's that kind of speech which has which is most powerful in establishing new human connections between people. And if we keep that in mind, I can tell you, we are ready for uh, a new kind of human living together. I don't know exactly how it will happen, and I just try to do my best to do it myself, but I often fail. It's difficult, and I here in Belgium and Holland, I give workshops, uh, hundreds of them, in
Okay.
which I try to understand what truth speech is, and in which we practice it in a practical way with the participants. So I believe that's our biggest challenge. We have to rediscover the central importance of truth for a human being and for human living together.
Dr. Robert Malone said that this mass formation phenomenon um should be included in a DCM, in a mental disorders book, as a social mental problem disorder, let's say. There we only have individual mental disorders, an inventory of individual mental disorders. What's your take on that?
Robert is a friend of mine. He stayed at my place in Belgium. I visited him at his place. I stayed at his place in West Virginia.
Mhm.
Uh, and we had a lot of conversations about this. Uh, you know, uh, Personally, I'm always very hesitant to use psychiatric terms and to psychiatrize other people. I think we
Okay.
don't need. I think we don't need to do that. That is also why I always refused to use the term mass formation psychosis. I use the term mass formation, and then a host of a podcast, I think it was Chris Anderson, added the term psychosis to it, and then Robert Malone just watched this podcast, and he used the term mass formation psychosis as well, because he thought that it was my term. I used the term, but I didn't. I never did, and I never won't. I think we don't have to try to give other people a psychiatric diagnosis. I think the only thing we should focus on, let's
reconnect one to each other.
Reconnect, and let's try to provide a really humane alternative for this society, which is based on manipulation and propaganda. And the people who produce the propaganda even don't know anymore that what they do is problematic from an ethical perspective. They think it is their sacred duty to do so, to nudge everyone and to nudge everyone into compliance, to nudge everyone in conformity. We know it is a problem. The first and foremost characteristic of a good, humane society is that there is a certain level of sincerity in it, and that's what is not the case anymore. If you listen to the media, if you read the narratives they produce, well, it's clear that very often they are not truthful at all anymore.
For those who are asking what's the name of the book, some people are asking. The Psychology of Totalitarianism is the title of the book. You can find it everywhere. It's available everywhere, including Amazon Kindle or whatever. Do you know by any chance if it was translated in Romanian?
No, I can ask my publisher. I wondered about the same. I just don't know. It's translated in Hungarian and so on, but I'm not sure whether it is translated in Romanian. I don't know, to be honest. I can look it up and send it to you if you want, but I can ask my publisher.
Okay. No rush, no problem. Now, there is a fact checker here from Reuters, and this fact checker has an article about this mass formation psychosis, and they say that there is no evidence of pandemic mass formation psychosis because it's not an academic term, it's not recognized, blah blah blah. Of course, they mention Joe Rogan, Robert Malone. I don't think they name you here. They also condemn this analogy with the 20s and 30s Germany, 20s, 30s. But I want to go there. I want to make this to discover, to explain the similarities between whatever happens in 2020, 2022 and 1920s, 1930s in Germany. This is very important. People need to understand how what we've been through is so similar with what they've been through.
Yes. Yes, that's what I do in my book. In my book, I describe the similarities and also the differences.
If you need to do something with the light, you can go and do something with it.
Yes, but I try to find out what the problem with the light is. But for me, it's not really a problem. But I don't know if the people who watch the interview find it.
No, it's okay. For them, it's okay. For you, it's not okay.
It's okay. Well, yes. Of course, the basic psychological mechanisms at work are exactly the same. I think they are exactly the same. We are just in the situation where the population fanatically starts to believe in a certain narrative, a certain ideology, in the fact that a certain strategy, such as lockdowns with very far-reaching consequences, is necessary in this situation, and so on and so on. People are stigmatized, people are excluded, cannot go to work anymore, lose their jobs, cannot travel anymore, or put in isolation, and so on and so on. Well, that's exactly the process that we have seen happening when the first totalitarian states emerged. It's exactly the same. If you read my book, I give ample evidence for that. And also, if you read the experiences of people such as Hannah Arendt just before the Second World War. That's exactly what they say. We had friends, we had colleagues, and so on, and they liked us. And suddenly, people started to believe in a certain narrative, and we were not welcome anymore. They considered us as an enemy. We were excluded, and so on. What happened? That's what happens time and time again. It's every time exactly the same experience people have who witness the emergence of a mass formation. So that's exactly what I describe. I think the elementary, most fundamental psychological mechanisms at work are the same as in Nazi Germany. They are the same as in the Soviet Union. Exactly. But of course, if you look at the totalitarian system in its entirety, there are differences as well. What we are dealing with now is not a fascist communist totalitarianism, which uses much terror. No, it's in the first place a velvet glove technocratic totalitarianism, which is based on propaganda and indoctrination. Propaganda and indoctrination is always important in totalitarianism, also in the Soviet Union, of course, and in Nazi Germany. But here I think we are dealing with a new totalitarianism, a totalitarianism which is not led by gang leaders such as Stalin and Hitler, as Hannah Arendt called them, but by dull bureaucrats and technocrats. But that doesn't take away very much totalitarianism. If it continues, it will prove to be just as cruel and just as relentless as the old-style totalitarianism. And it will, just like the old-style totalitarianism, it will try to marginalize, ridiculize, psychiatrize, criminalize everyone who goes against that, and in the end tries to destroy them. It will try to destroy them. And the better we realize that, the better we see how important it is to really understand the psychological mechanisms at work and to know what we can do and what we cannot do. And the only thing we can do is determined, non-violent resistance, centered on the act of truth speech. Read Václav Havel, I don't know how you pronounce his name.
Václav Havel.
That's exactly what, read Mahatma Gandhi, they all knew. As soon as you are confronted with a system that is intrinsically bureaucratic in nature, and that's what totalitarianism is. Totalitarianism is always a kind of very extreme bureaucratic system, just like imperialism was. Imperialism was also the first bureaucratic state system. And bureaucratic systems have something very specific. In the end, Hannah Arendt say, a bureaucratic system is a tyranny without a tyrant. So meaning that there is no small regime or a person that you can destroy and to make the system disappear. No, it won't disappear, because the system is much more than the regime that is in charge. The system, the point of gravity of the system is much more situated at the level of the masses who are in the grip of this ideology. So meaning that if you destroy the elite, it will just be replaced by new people. That's the problem. Stalin realized that very much. He realized that he could eliminate 50-60% of his communist party, that his system would not collapse. It was just replaced by other people, and the system continued. If you would do the same in a classical dictatorship, the dictatorship would collapse. It would collapse.
Okay.
Because the point of gravity is not in the masses in a dictatorship. It's in the regime.
Yeah.
So the better we understand what is going on, the more we will see what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And we will, in the end, if we continue to follow the principles of humanity, no matter what happens, in particular, this first and foremost ethical principle of humanity, namely that we all have the ethical duty to articulate the words that are sincere and honest. If we continue to do so, no matter what happens, then we will see that the system will destroy itself before it destroys the people who do not go along with it. And that's what should be our main focus. Totalitarian systems are always self-destructive. And the only thing is that they have to destroy themselves before they destroy the people who do not go along with them. And
Right. Yeah.
and what the people who do not go along with the system should do is just continue to speak out in public space. That's the most important thing. I repeat that time and time and time again, because history has shown us what happens if the resistance stops to speak out. At that moment, in a period of a few months to 1 year, the system starts to destroy everyone who doesn't go along with it. And then it starts to destroy the people who do go along with it. So in the end, the totalitarian system always becomes a monster that devours its own children. But we should try to make it destroy itself before it destroys us. That's the most important
Yeah.
message.
We have to have a longer survivability, let's say, to be able to survive after they collapse. Yeah.
Yes,
Um, our longevity have to surpass their longevity.
exactly.
Um, so we can say, if people go to some church and talk to each other, if people go to some parties and talk to each other, if people drink a coffee, I don't know, on a coffee shop, or they just relate to each other on, I don't know, maybe some dancing party or whatever, that is the easiest way to exchange information, to express the truth to each other, and then to neutralize all the manipulation the collective, the authorities try to impose on the masses. Uh, in this regard, I would bring up the protests, the street protests that happened everywhere. And I think the most important component is not the protest itself. You go and say no in front of some institution or whatever. You just go and talk to each other. This is what they hate the most, the establishment. People go and start to talk to each other and to relate to each other and smile to each other, and exchange ideas and feelings and emotions to each other, not watching the TV anymore with the figures and whatever. I think this is the most important component of a street protest.
I know that at least it's one important component. It's one important component. It's extremely important because indeed, as you say, it's important to establish connections. So
Mhm.
that's extremely important. But at the same time, it's also extremely important because you make a statement with it, and your statement will uh, disturb the all these statements made by the regime. So it's hypnosis is always induced by a voice.
It's
By
it's like it's like saying it's like voting. It's like voting against the regime. I vote against you just
it's
by being here on the street.
Yes, and at the psychological level, you make that the massive resonance of the hypnotic voice, the propaganda, is disturbed by a voice that says something different. So
Mhm.
that's just at the, purely speaking, at the psychological technical level. That's why it is so important uh, for the dissonant voices to continue to speak out in public space, because they constantly disturb the hypnotic state. They constantly do so. And every hypnotist knows that. You cannot hypnotize someone if someone else is talking to him. You need to be the only one speaking. And
Mhm.
that's extremely important. And we have to speak in a very particular way, in a really humane way. We have to realize that also the totalitarian leaders or people, they are humane. And they are hypnotized themselves. That's something that was very well described by Gustave Le Bon in the 19th century already. What is so typical of the leaders of the masses is that they are themselves in the grip of the hypnosis. That doesn't mean that they believe everything they are saying. No, they very often do not believe the narratives they use, but they also fanatically believe in the underlying ideology of their narratives. In this case, for instance, in transhumanism and the technocratic discourse, they truly fanatically believe that transhumanism will bring the human being to a new paradise. They do so fanatically believe in it that I think it is justified to sacrifice 70% of the population to arrive in that paradise. It's always the same with a totalitarian paradise, Hannah Arendt says. It's always the same. The only problem with a totalitarian paradise is that it looks suspiciously like hell. That's the problem. They want to sacrifice everything. So, but they fanatically believe, just like Hitler and the Nazis fanatically believed that they would create a new paradise. Now we have people who fanatically believe in it. They believe so fanatically in it that I think it is justified to manipulate and lie time and time again, and to use all these narratives, the climate narrative and the Me Too narrative and all these narratives, to use them to convince the population to buy into their big ideology, to accept all these changes they want to impose to society, to transform it to a transhumanist society, to a large internet of bodies, as they sometimes call it, in which every body, every human being is saturated with chips and all kinds of technology and connected to the big state computer, which will tell it what to do. That's exactly, I think, that's why we have to do with people who are hypnotized themselves at a certain level, but they are still human beings, and we have to talk with them as if they are human beings. We have to try to do the opposite of what they do, not manipulate them, but try to talk with them in a sincere way. And we won't convince them immediately. That's something very important. We will never be capable of convincing them, and we won't be capable of waking up the masses immediately. That is impossible. Gustave Le Bon described that already in the 19th century. You usually won't succeed to wake them up, but that doesn't mean that your words have no effect. They do have an effect, and the more sincere and humble and honest they are, the more they will resonate with the people who listen to them, and they will, even when they are not convinced, internally they will start to doubt a little bit, and they will start to feel that these people who do not go along with them, that they are really humane human beings, and that they should consider them as such. That means that they should not destroy them. That's the point.
Got it. Okay, so I think we are through with our 60 minutes. It was a very intense hour. People started to ask for a translation. I need to provide translations for these English interviews, of course, in Romanian language. I will provide that in the future based on the voluntary help I will find.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mattias, for explaining all these things to us. I hope if they are going to impose again in this fall, this winter, people will not conform. I hope less than 15%, 15% of people will comply. And thank you very much for being here. And I think, cred că conexiunea lui s-a și oprit. În regulă, dragilor, știu că ați strigat pe parcursul întregului interviu dacă vor fi sau nu vor fi traduceri. Vor fi traduceri. O să fie traduceri. Acum mă caută să-mi spună că ceva cu conexiunea. Probabil s-a supraîncălzit smartphone-ul. Anyway. Ne oprim aici. Îmi spune că are o problemă cu telefonul. Vă mulțumesc și vouă, celor care ați fost atenți, și vă rog să dați share, like și așa mai departe. Ok. Cartea, încă o dată, se numește... stai să afișez cartea, că am zis că o afișez pe ecran. Asta este cartea. Ups, a intrat din nou. Ok. I think your phone it has a temperature problem, right? You are on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know. The connection suddenly dropped away. I have no idea.
So, few closing words, and we will wrap up.
Yes. So, people, thank you all for being here, watching this interview, listening, because I always say, and I mean that, we can articulate words. It's important that we speak out in public space, but it's extremely important that we listen to each other as well. And you were an audience for me. Without people listening, I would not. My words would have no effect. So and just there would be no resonance. Thank you very much for being here, for listening here. And I think it's so important that we all do our best, some on a large scale, some on a very small scale. A sincere word that is spoken at the kitchen table to one person has an effect on the whole world. The psychological state of society is a complex and dynamical phenomenon. And complex dynamical phenomena are in complex dynamical phenomena, an extremely small change in one detail of the system changes the entire system. That's what we have to realize. If we really speak one sincere word to one person, we have an impact on the entire system. We all have an impact on the entire world. So please, let's do our best all together to find out what it is to speak in a sincere and a truthful way. And let's do it, just all together. We are all equally important in doing so.
Thank you. Thank you. Vă mulțumesc și vouă. Închidem interviul aici. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.